Now, how can carbon markets help African countries? Of course, the first element is the generation of revenue streams. Fenella has described you how this works, so I don't have to duplicate Fenella's presentation here. What is very important is that most African countries in their NDCs have conditional targets. That means the targets are conditional on international support. Now, of course, international carbon markets provide such support through their revenue streams. So one can use Article 6 to reach conditional targets of the NDCs. Of course, there are some countries that also have unconditional targets. There, the international carbon markets can help to raise the ambition of the NDC as a whole. Then the carbon markets are a very nice tool of innovation. We, for example, seen in the forest sector. 15, 20 years ago, you went into the forest, you measured tree trunks. Now you have remote sensing. You can digitally monitor, for example, cook stoves. They have a chip, and this chip then provides information to a central database regarding the use of the cook stove. So we've really seen huge innovation there in the last decade, and it is continuing. Of course, Africa needs to ensure that the CDM transition is actually being undertaken, especially for the programmatic approaches, that those that have started under the CDM can now continue to expand under Article 6. That's very important for the upscaling, and I mentioned sequestered capital and the big cook stove activities in Southern Africa. One important aspect that one needs to understand, especially as a government, that of course, and Fenella mentioned it, you need to have the double bookkeeping, the corresponding adjustment. That is mandatory for Article 6, but also, of course, it will become a mark of quality in the carbon markets. And then, of course, one important aspect is now the carbon markets can help to push host country priorities. The international climate finance is less flexible because the donors, they actually have their targets, whereas the carbon markets, carbon finance, you can, as a government, direct into those areas where you really want to have a change. And of course, carbon markets usually, they are generating direct revenues. Climate finance often takes the form of loans, and then it generates risks for the country. The debt burden increases. So here I have my famous graph on the coordination of carbon markets and climate finance, the blending. So usually you would look, of course, into the mitigation as per the mitigation cost. You may have certain options that are actually profitable. Those are not attractive for carbon markets because they will not pass the additionality test. So those usually would be unilaterally financed within the country. Then you have the cheap options that are having costs that are lower than the international credit price on the carbon markets. Those are attractive for the Article 6.2 and 6.4. And then, of course, you will always have a gamut of mitigation options that is more costly than the price on the international carbon markets. And there it would be important in the future now to integrate carbon market financing and climate finance. So you can combine the revenue from the carbon markets with some grant funding through either, for example, Green Climate Fund and or bilateral sources. Unfortunately, in the past, the climate finance institutions always wanted to have an iron curtain between climate finance and carbon markets. But this is currently changing, and I would hope that in the next couple of years, we see more and more of that blending. With regard to Article 6 readiness that you need to have on a government level, but of course also involving other stakeholders, it's very important that there are the three targeted areas. So first, that you first have a policy, an Article 6 strategy, which is actually vetted by all the countries' stakeholders and institutions. You need a designated national authority that is able to authorize the activities and authorize the ITMOs. Of course, this needs to be underpinned by a specific framework, legal and technical. And I think the Ghana example is very nice because that's very elaborate there. And then there needs to be some infrastructure, hardware. You need to follow of course, the development of the activities. You need to understand where the credits are. There will, of course, be some centralized registries operated by the FCCC, but that may still take some time. And of course, what is crucial is that all this is brought together and that the different stakeholders are involved. Because if you have the beautiful strategy, but you don't have an epistemic community of consultancies, of project developers, of auditors that can actually undertake work for Article 6, then it doesn't really make sense. That would be a white elephant. And we don't want white elephants under Article 6. So here I bring 6 key points with regard to capacity building for Article 6 that have been developed under a UK initiative called Project Catalyst in the context of COP26. And I think this is generally important. And of course, I would hope that the activities that are undertaken in Africa follow these approaches. So of course, first you need awareness regarding the benefits, and that these benefits don't accrue just to a small group, but that they accrue to a wide range of stakeholders. You need to have the inclusive institutional framework for participation. You need to have a pragmatic learning by doing approach, not just workshops. I remember 20 years ago when the CDM came up, there was a flurry of workshops, but there were only very few concrete activities. Now with Article 6, we are getting better. We are learning by doing, and Fenella has described some approaches run by GGI, but there are others. And then, of course, we need broadly accessible knowledge products, and that's where the alliances now are getting really active. In the West and East African Alliance, we have a broad range of knowledge products where Perspective supported the content, and these are now being used, and they already generate benefits. And that, of course, the capacity building is not run in many different silos by different donors and technical providers, but that this is coordinated and we get a comprehensive toolbox. So to conclude, what should be the key African priorities for COP27 in Egypt? So we still have negotiations regarding important aspects of Article 6, like reporting, like review processes, also under Article 6.4, the methodologies. So we hope that the Egyptian presidency and also the African countries, the African group, can help to get these high integrity rules completed. Then, of course, we have many least developed countries and some small island developing states in Africa. It is clear that there will be some exceptions from certain rules for those states. And we need to see how these exceptions can be framed in order to prevent that LDC and SIDS-based activities are not seen as bad quality, but that they are not undergoing too cumbersome rules. For example, standardization of baselines is an important aspect here, standardization of additionality determination, and also the issue of suppressed demand, because suppressed demand, which means that you can take into account also if activities increase overall. For example, a certain service increases, so overall emissions may not go down very much, but the emission intensity goes down strongly, and you get credited for the reduction of the emissions intensity. So that essentially is the suppressed demand issue, and this runs against many other principles now specified under Article 6. So we need to see how to deal with this properly, that it doesn't destroy, let's say, the market credibility, but that it, of course, takes into account the situation of the LDCs. Then eligibility of RED+. This is still being debated in the context of Article 6.4. Then also we have various highly technical issues regarding accounting approaches, but these are important because if they are too complicated, they may be difficult to be applied by African countries. Then this issue of the exclusion of banking from one NDC period to the next. Then also the issue of the timing of the authorization of ITMOs. The current rules give various time points, and some of those may be too late for the market to be credible. And then, of course, again, linked to nature-based solution, technical issues related to removals, especially that the rules say we need to prevent reversals in full, but we know this cannot be done technically. So we need to have pragmatic approaches that are still credible.